Nico and J Kidd ran out of patience with Luka Dončić, with the constant conditioning concerns, with some of the petulance and all those sort of things, despite the fact that this guy's production at his age ranks up there with anybody who you want to bring up in NBA history.
Now, Luka, despite the weight issues, was still doing his thing. But notice how early on Tim McManaman had mentioned that there was a secret committee making major decisions. We're going to see a continuation throughout this segment of just having a culture of so many different voices without necessarily tying the responsibility of just having the power of those voices. For example, someone could be part of that committee making a major decision, but they don't receive the blame as if they were a GM or team president making that decision. And that's a trickle-down effect from Mark Cuban. He's the one that set the tone within the back rooms of the Dallas Mavericks with this kind of culture.
Look, there was a lot of strangeness going on at the time in the Mavericks organization. There was kind of a cold war between Nico and J Kidd that summer, coming off of the tank job. There was kind of some quiet finger pointing going on. J Kidd had made it clear that another one of the moves under Nico's watch he wasn't a fan of. That was the Christian Wood acquisition, the Christian Wood trade. But there was when things go that wrong, people are going to look to for people to blame. And I think there was some finger pointing between J Kidd and Nico. Casey was a right-hand man for J Kidd. Their relationship dated back to J Kidd's playing days. So I kind of read that as, and other people in the organization kind of read that as Nico's way of saying, hey, I'm in charge here. So there's a little bit of that.
Now right there, J Kidd was able to point the finger at Nico, even though he was higher ranked, is because of the position Mark Cuban actually put Harris in. Cuban has been on record stating that multiple times the only reason that he hired Nico Harris was to gain more access to free agents, and he didn't necessarily give him the exact powers of just being the team's general manager and president. Remember, he was both. So within that rift, there was already a layer of confusion because team president and coach should be on the same page. And right here, we're going to find out when it came to the Luka trade, those two were a lot more on code than we were led to believe.
Hey, his weight fluctuated last year when he was averaging a league-leading 34 points, 10 rebounds, 9 assists, when he led the postseason in points, rebounds, assists, and steals, never been done before, and took a team to the NBA Finals. His petulance has been a running theme, the ranting at the refs and sometimes letting that affect his focus. Like, the guy his flaws are as apparent as his talent. But his talent damn sure overshadows the flaws. There's people in Dallas who think like I'm a Luka hater or like a Luka critic. I've gotten like, how could you write a book about Luka? You hated on him his whole career. Like, I've covered him honestly his whole career. And, I can honestly say I was as shocked. I knew how frustrated the Mavericks were with his conditioning. And I was still completely flabbergasted by the trade just because you don't give up that kind of generational talent unless he's putting the gun to your head. And he wasn't, despite the fraying of the relationship with Nico Harrison, and that definitely happened for a variety of reasons. Luka wanted to spend his whole career in Dallas. He wanted to have a statue out there next to Dirk's. Like, the one thing about Luka is that he does have in common with Dirk a strong sense of loyalty. And I even when I was reporting that there was fear in the organization that Luka was going to ask for a trade if they didn't get the ship turned around, the year they had to tank to keep that top 10 protected pick, it wasn't out of disloyalty. It was just because, like, dude, if it's a complete failure of a franchise around you, like, how could you not consider looking elsewhere? But, I included a chapter just on the Slovenian national team, and I thought that was important because that illustrates his loyalty. It's a case-by-case thing playing for your national team for almost every superstar in the league. He's an exception. And he didn't have to play for Slovenia. He had kind of his international free agency. He had a Spanish passport, had never played an official tournament for Slovenia. He could have easily hopped on the bandwagon of an established powerhouse in Spain. Never even discussed it with like his best friends, the Hernan Gomez brothers. So yeah, there's a whole lot going on here, but the idea that Nico's thrown out there, well, we don't know if he was going to sign that Supermax. Yeah, you do. You knew he was going to. You didn't want to give it to him. This book I wrote over the course of a few summers, and I definitely began writing it with the thought that it could end with a Luka trade. I just thought,
Right.
like I just said, it was going to be because he was going to have to ask for a trade because the Mavericks were going to completely fail around. Like I started writing it right after they bungled the Brunson situation,
Right.
which, coming off of conference finals, you lose the second best player for nothing. That's there's a whole chapter on just how badly they screwed up that situation. So I don't know how much would be different as far as how I wrote the book, because it does kind of capture all the pressure, all the drama, all this function. It's just a crazy plot twist at the end. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, like, it would be dishonest for me to be writing it and say, okay, we should have seen this coming. While Mark Cuban had control of the franchise, like you can have the GM title. You're the GM when he wants to let you be the GM. I mean, Cuban's still running the show. And so it wasn't until midway through last season when Cuban gave up the majority share, and he said he was going to keep basketball operations control. That wasn't reality. I mean, it just wasn't the case. That's when Nico was able to not only take control of basketball ops, but frankly box Cuban out. Nico did a very intentional job of boxing out and keeping Cuban completely out of the mix. But look, like you said, the Kyrie trade, controversial at the time, didn't pay immediate dividends. They have to tank that year to keep the top 10 protected pick. But Kyrie's been phenomenal in Dallas. And Kyrie and Luka formed a great chemistry. They have a bond. Kyrie really did a great job of kind of learning how to play off of Luka. Luka adapted to, play faster and realize, hey, a simpler thing as a look ahead pass. Get the ball out of his hands, play faster. That empowers Kyrie, empowers his teammates. And that was like one of the great stories of last season, was just how much that duo clicked and how much they enjoyed each other. It's kind of an iconic image where they beat Houston in overtime late in the season. They kind of collapse into each other's arms, and it was a great duo. And then, Nico made moves around like the rest of the starting lineup and rotation that worked. The pick of Derek Lively, trading down to get him at 12 overall. Dude, that's a perfect pick and roll partner for Luka. Nico wants to talk about how his trades didn't work right away or weren't popular right away. He leaves out, like, they tried to give up 2 firsts for Kyle Kuzma. Okay. And then when that fell through because somehow Kuzma had a mythical no trade clause that the Wizards let him use, then he pivoted to one of those firsts is going to Daniel Gafford. One of those firsts is going for PJ Washington. But suddenly you've got this big athletic front court, all these lob targets, all these guys who can really run. Derek Jones Jr. as a minimum was a huge addition last year. And so you've surrounded Luka with this long, athletic, supporting cast that fit around him. And the whole defense wins championship thing, it's like, dude, the Mavericks had the number 1 defense in the league for the last 20 games last year. That continued into the playoffs. They didn't lose to the Celtics because their defense fell apart. And I know you can put up a low light reel of Luka getting blown by. They lost because they didn't hit shots. And if defense wins championships, and that's it. That's the only thing you can do. That's the way we're building this team. Why'd you get Klay Thompson this summer? Like, come on, man. I know Klay's been a hell of a defender throughout the course of his career, but not coming off an Achilles and an ACL in his mid-30s. So, like, what I'm trying to tell you is Nico's plan has been very fluid, and I think he talked during his exit interview press conference about how process-oriented it is. The Luka trade was not process-oriented. The Luka trade was emotional. It was emotional, it was irrational, and it was illogical. And I can tell you for sure it was illogical because I pressed Nico on very flawed logic in the deal, and all he can say is defense wins championships.
It goes to show you how hard it is to build a team around Luka, because the Mavericks were definitely trying to get Kyle Kuzma, and the PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford move just ended up working out perfectly. Right now we're watching the Lakers trying to solve that same Rubik's Cube on what to align around Luka, especially with his pending 10-year Supermax contract, which will guarantee to put them over the luxury tax year in, year out, whether the team is good or not.
Or like, oh, you don't like the trade. We put together a championship caliber roster. You saw it for 2.5 quarters. 2.5 quarters? Brother, I saw a finals run last year. What the, which one makes me believe more? Come on, man. After Christmas, and that was Luka's fourth calf strain in 28 months. Same calf, left calf. And Nico definitely blamed poor conditioning for that. Luka's people said, hey, he's come back too soon from injuries, including the left heel. He's whatever. So there was this divide between Nico and Luka's camp.
And Nico was wrong about that. Luka actually came into that season in tremendous shape. Now, after that calf strain, that's where a lot of the weight gain quickly happened. But there's photos out there of that offseason. Skinny Luka was back, entering into that final year with the Mavericks.
For sure. And the level of frustration that Nico had at that time was high. By the way, Jay Kidd's was too. And, I think Jay Kidd's kind of trying to distance himself from
yes,
this.
he is.
Jay Kidd's frustration level was, I can just tell you with Luke, was also quite high. But, I was told at the time, hey, if we got to trade him, and obviously it's off the record, but they traded him now, so I'll say it. If we got to trade him, we'll trade his ass. And I'm like,
there you go. Tim McManaman is revealing that Jay Kidd had a lot more to do with that trade than what's been led on.
No, you won't. I seriously, I rolled my eyes. I'm like, okay, you're huffing, you're puffing. You ain't blowing that house down. Give me a break. Because it's a ludicrous thing to consider. And how many times, Monty, have you been talking to somebody and they huff, they puff? They're just talking shit. They ain't going to do anything. And I thought this was one of those cases. And then 6 weeks later, my phone dings. What? They actually did it? Again, I was told, venting. We'll trade this guy if we have to. But here's the thing. You didn't have to. You went to the finals months ago. Okay. The weight fluctuates, there's some defiance. I get it. It's frustrating. Typically, historic production gives a guy a little bit of leeway. And I will just say, and I kind of included this in the last chapter, there are a lot of people who are very strong defenders of Luka who have either been in that organization or remain in that organization. And I'm not going to tell you Luka's low maintenance. I'm just going to tell you on the superstar spectrum in the NBA, he's not toward the top. He's not. You can go down the list of superstars. There are several who are more high maintenance than Luka. Somebody in the book says, ask Miami if they'd have rather dealt with Luka or Jimmy Butler for the last few months, leading up to the trade deadline. That's just one example. You don't give up that kind of talent if he's excited about spending his entire career with your franchise.
Now, that situation with Jimmy Butler and Luka is sort of correlated. Miami did not want to renegotiate Jimmy Butler's deal, even though he's up there in age, but they didn't want to extend him. Also, when you look at Luka's situation with that pending Supermax contract, that would have definitely put the new Mavericks owners into the luxury tax after spending $4 billion on that team. Us as NBA fans, we're going to see this become a trend going forward with a lot of these superstars as they continue to sign these very lucrative deals.
They could have had a decade-plus run into the future with Luka, and this is where the logic really falls apart. Nico Harrison's own words, he created a 3 to 4 year time frame. And forget what's happened. Obviously, the first year got blown up when Kyrie went down with a knee injury. Next year's in jeopardy. That 3 to 4 year time frame, you gave up to successfully build a contender around Luka, your first round draft capital in 27, 28, 29, and 30.
Yes, and what also gets unsaid is that all those draft picks, all those first round fucking draft picks belong to the contending teams within their conference, the Houston Rockets, the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the San Antonio Spurs. All those teams are pretty much in contention mode before they even cash in on those picks.
So just as the credit card bill is coming due, your time frame ends? And then how is that? And I asked Nico straight up in this weird no cameras allowed roundtable thing, how is that in the best interest of the Dallas Mavericks? He just kept repeating defense wins championships. Nico's obviously, he was running Nike's North American basketball ops for a long time. That's a well-paying position. So was being a general manager of an NBA team. Maybe he just rides off into the sunset. I don't know. But there's I was talking to Somebody who's in an ownership group of another Western Conference team recently, and they basically said, I hate to say it, but this is going to be his legacy. This trade's his legacy. Like, he's never going to work in the NBA again. And like, there are people around the league who are just like, you have to fire him. Like, you that's the only way to begin the healing process for the Mavericks fan base. But Patrick Dumont is not there. He's not there yet. Now, the In Nico We Trust era has ended. You know, he wants him to bring in an experienced exec, and, you know, like, I think he's realized, like, okay, we've got to have some checks and balances that weren't in place. I think this has been a very educational experience for Patrick Dumont in his first full year as an NBA governor. Also, the realization of, hey, in this world, management's not the stars. The stars are the guys on the floor. That's what this whole league revolves around. The superstars are the guys who drive business in this league, not the bosses. And honestly, like, as frankly illogical of a basketball decision as this was, I think what's going to ultimately cost Nico his job is this was a terrible, terrible business decision. I think they might lose $1 billion worth of revenue over the course of what would have been a $345 million contract. Nico convinced Patrick Dumont that Supermax deal would be a terrible investment. And look, he thinks Luka's body's going to break down. We'll see if he's right or wrong. I don't care if he suffers a major injury. Luka would have had insane trade value on that contract, just like Damian Lillard did. But where was Dame? Dame wanted to go to MI somewhere. It wasn't MIL.
He wanted to go to MIAMI. It ended up in MIL-Walkie.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because why? Why could they do that? Because he was locked up long term. So if you wanted to trade the guy, the Supermax was your best weapon. But anyways, the bottom line, Patrick Dumont doesn't understand basketball. Okay, you like basketball, sure. He doesn't get basketball. He gets business. He gets when you're bleeding on the bottom line. And this was a disastrous business decision.
And it looks like Patrick Dumont has finally moved forward, because the hiring of Masai Ujiri signifies that, hey, he's here to clean up house, and the Mavericks could finally just have Cooper Flagg be that face and move forward with him in mind. Right there, we've seen a lot of layers to the complications of just the chain of communication within the Dallas Mavericks organization. And it makes sense why Mark Cuban is consistently on an apology tour, making crazy statements. Oh, I regret selling the team to the Dumont family. Oh, I was never consulted about them trading Luka, etc., etc. The fans are basically seeing the trickle-down effects of the culture that the man created.